Now we are moving on to the third topic of the same lesson, French Revolution, France a Republic. So in the last class we stopped with learning France has become a constitutional monarchy. The king's rule was in place with him being and his rule being checked or his powers being limited by the accepted constitution. But even though France had a constitution, the powers of the king was limited. Its political situation still did not appear to be relaxed. What can be the reasons for that? Louis XVI's rule is now under strict restrictions which he did not accept. As a king, it is not very easy to accept that he is no more the sole authority in total control of the country's administration. It is not an easy thing for any king to accept. So this was bothering him very badly. Being unhappy, he entered into secret negotiations with his neighboring Prussian king. So one neighboring king was the king of Prussia. So he secretly talked with the king of Prussia and they together talked to the other neighboring countries who were also disturbed by the rising power of the French people. So everybody all around France, the countries around France were watching what was happening in France, how the people were trying to change the rule in France. What must have made the neighboring kings also disturbed and in confusion, because the people will also come to know about this and their situation will also become the same as of Louis XVI. So these kings together, they planned to send troops to France to suppress the public protest. But even before this could happen, the National Assembly of France voted for a war against Prussia and Austria. So there was another important neighboring country for France, Austria. So first, the French king with Prussia and with the other neighboring countries, they decided to go for war against French people. But they could not, before they could do anything, the National Assembly, they decided to vote against Prussia and Austria. They too must have known that these kings were working against them. Considering this as a war of the people against king and his rule, many others also joined the war. That is, joined with the National Assembly's decision to wage a war against the neighboring countries. So not only the National Assembly, the whole public decided to get together. The people, they sang patriotic songs, and the one sung by the volunteers who came from Marseilles was chosen as the national anthem of France. So, of course, right from the beginning when we started learning about French Revolution, we learned it was the war that destroyed the financial capacity or the money they had with them. So, this too will bring for sure economic difficulties. Even then, a large section of the population stood for continued wars to gain political rights for all its citizens. As of now, the constitution has granted only men above 25 years, and that too the rich people who could afford to pay tax equivalent to 3 days' wages of a laborer. So, in simple words, you can say it is only the richer sections of the society that were granted voting rights. The people were not happy with that also. The women and other men were denied voting rights. So, for that, what did they do? The people, they started political clubs where they could get together and talk about political issues and decide on their plan of action. The most successful political club was the Jacobian Club. The members of this club were mainly the less prosperous sections of the society. The less prosperous, that is the less rich people of the society. And they had a leader by name Maximilian Robespierre. So, in the year 1792, during the summer of 1792, the Jacobians Club, the members of the Jacobians Club, they planned for a violent uprising to revolt strongly against the government. What was the reason? As they could not afford to buy the highly priced food, and also there was shortage of food. These were the reasons that pushed the public against the rule. So, the same situation was there in summer of 1792, the Jacobians Club, they revolted against the government as they could not afford to buy the highly priced bread and there was shortage of food. What did they do? They stormed the palace of Tuileries. They killed the guards and held the king as hostage, and later he was imprisoned. So, they stormed the palace of Tuileries. They took the ruler or the king as hostage and he was imprisoned. After that, what did they do? Elections were then held and all men above 21 years of age were granted voting rights. Now it's the time of the Jacobian Club. Now what did they do? They changed the policy. And they decided to give so that they'll have more people voting for them, more support for them from the people. So they decided to bring down the voting age to 21 years. They brought down the voting age to 21 years. All men about 21 years, irrespective of them being rich or poor, were allowed to vote. And a newly elected government came to place. And that was called as the Convention. The Convention. The newly elected government. By whom? By the Jacobian Club. The newly elected government by the Jacobian Club was called the Convention. And what did they do? They abolished monarchy. They abolished monarchy. They wiped away totally the rule by the king. They wiped away totally the rule by the king and declared France as a republic. Not only did they abolish monarchy, they also did what? They declared France as a monarch. They declared France as a republic. So now they have a national elected government, they have a constitution, and now they have elected head. That is what is meant by republic. So now France is a republic. So it was during the time of the Jacobian Club in the summer of 1792 when they revolted against the government for them being unable to get enough food at affordable prices. They took the king as a hostage, imprisoned him, and went for election, granting voting rights to men about 21 years of age, both rich and poor, and a government was formed by name Convention. This elected government abolished monarchy and also declared France as a republic. So, when did this happen? This happened on September 12, 1792. In 1791, National Assembly, Constitution. 1792, France became a republic. Understood? 1791, it got its constitution, its National Assembly, and in 1792, it became a republic. The very next year, so what will that year be? 1793. 1793. In the year 1793, what happened in French history? That is, Louis XVI, he was now in prison, he was sentenced to death. Now who will become the ruler? Who has more support from the people or by the people? It was the time of which club? The Jacobian Club. It was the time of the Jacobian Club. Who was the leader of that Jacobian Club? We had already learned that. Who is the leader of the Jacobian Club? Maximilian Robespierre. So what happens? Maximilian Robespierre will now become the head of the state. And his period, he ruled from 1793 to 94. Just 1 year he ruled. 1793 to 94. And this ruling period of Maximilian Robespierre was called as Reign of Terror. It was called as a terrific period, Reign of Terror. It was called as the Reign of Terror. This man Maximilian Robespierre was a very strict disciplinarian, and anyone found working against his policies were killed. It must be his strict rule, harsh policies. People found it very difficult to be a part of that society or country, and they named his reign this 1 year 1793 to 94 as Reign of Terror. What were his policies that the people did not like? He fixed wages and prices of essential commodities. Meat and bread was rationed. So much only a family, a member will get, say, 2 loaves of bread a week. Meat, say 1 kg of wheat only they will get. So it was rationed. Use of the expensive white flour was forbidden. Formal way of addressing each other was changed. Churches were shut down, and these were converted to military barracks or military offices. So people found it very difficult to accept his harsh policies. And finally in 1794, he too was gluttoned. What do you mean by gluttoned? What is the meaning of this word? Glutton means he was skilled. And when Maximilian Robespierre is no more, what happens to the Jacobian government? It will lose its power. So, the rule by the Jacobian Club came to an end. So, now there is a political vacuum in France. Now, there will be many to take up the position as ruler. Here, it was the time for the wealthier middle class to take up the rule. The wealthier middle class took up the rule. The wealthier middle class took up the rule. And they introduced a new constitution and denied voting rights to landless people. When the Jacobian Club, irrespective of being rich or poor, all about 21 was given voting rights men. When the new wealthy middle class came to power, what did they do? They introduced a new constitution and changed voting rights age. That is, it could not be granted to landless people. The power of governance or administration was divided between two elected legislative councils. Two elected legislative councils and an appointed directory. And appointed directory, C. And an appointed directory. So, once when the wealthy middle class came to power, what did they first do? They changed the constitution, gave voting rights to and denied voting rights to landless people. And denied voting rights to landless people. So, and what did they next do? They divided the rule, the power of administration to be shared between whom and whom? Two elected legislative councils and a directory, which consisted of 5 members called the executive. The 5 members who was supposed to two elected legislative councils and a directory which had 5 members who were called as the executive. Why did they go for this sharing of power between the 2 elected legislative councils? This will have representation from the people, and this directory, from among them 5 members were given a little more higher power, so that the rule will not be with one single person. It will be shared among many. Now, this directory, because they had an upper hand, they always clashed with these 2 legislative councils, and administration became very difficult, and this was soon dismissed. Again, a political instability is in place in France. Now, this space was taken over by a military dictator by name Napoleon Bonaparte. So, wealthy middle class, all what they could do, they do. They did not also succeed very much. They could also not succeed and stay in place for long. So, they fell, and now who is coming to power? A military dictator found this as a good opportunity to take up the charge or to become the ruler of France. He was Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte. So, all this while we were talking about men getting voting rights, them doing something, is it not? So, women were also having certain frustrations. They were also having certain problems, not being allowed to participate in politics, not given equal rights. They were nowhere said that they were given voting rights. Even though being member of the third estate, they were not allowed to do anything for their own country and for their personal needs. So, what did they do? So, they also played a place in the revolution. Women played an active role, and they started their own political clubs and newspapers. So, you remember the role of the political clubs. That is where men came together, sat and talked about political issues and decided upon the plan of action. Same thing, they also decided to continue. So, their political club was called by name Society of Revolutionary and Republican Women. Society of Revolutionary and Republican Women. That is the name of the Women's Political Club. This was a known one, a popular one. What was their demand? They wanted to get the same political rights as men and be allowed to be elected to the assembly. They want also to be a part of the administrative system for their own country. They wanted political rights and to be part of or members of the elected assembly. That was their need. When Jacobian Club was in place, when that government was ruling, they tried to keep them satisfied and under control. They did something good for the women. By law, they also helped them to improve their lives. Made schooling compulsory for girls. Women were given freedom to choose their career. But the only thing they did not allow women to have was they were banned from active political activities which they wanted. Because they knew unless they represent themselves, nobody is going to take care of their problems, their needs, and they will never be identified. So, with their continued efforts, they gained their rights in the year 1946. So, in the year 1946, women also became a part of French politics. They played an active role from then on in the politics of France. So, now women is also almost happy and satisfied, but still a society of equality before law, freedom of speech and fraternity remained in the dreams of the French people. It is still not complete. So, the social thinkers have said fight for equality, fight for freedom, fight for fraternity, fight for opportunity for all. But now still, since there are changes happening in France, in society of France, but still it is not completely undone from the age-old monarchical rule and the social and political structure and system that was existing there in France. So, they still had to get 100% equality before law, freedom of speech and fraternity, and this was still in the dreams of the people of France. Hope you have understood. So, it's just like a story, incident after incident, something one after the other incidents happening, and it comes to an end with women gaining their interests, men gaining their interests, on the whole the society gaining a constitution and a national assembly to look after them,